Hi everyone, Gigabeef here. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the best budget weapons for killing players in Escape from Tarkov. Other rival PMCs pose as the most threat when we're running our raids, and if you want to survive against them, you have to be running the right equipment. But this doesn't always have to break the bank. It's not required to run the most meta low recoil M4 or a thermal M1A to get the job done. So stick around and I'll show you some of my favourites, and hopefully you'll have success with them too. Right, so let's get started. Broadly speaking, I'm going to split down the guns into a few categories. Those of you who've watched my videos before know that I love to start with a good framework, which gives us the building blocks and information that we need to decide what works and when to use it. I've said it before and I'll say it again, ballistics and ammo drive a good portion of the weapon choices in this game. The way that I see it is that we need something with one of the following: big bullets and big pen. Guns that run 7.62-54R, i.e. the Mosin bullet, or 7.62-51 can basically nail anyone in 2 shots to the thorax, regardless of armour. This is interesting to us. Good all-rounders, i.e. assault rifle flexibility. AK or AR-15 style weapons with the right ammo work in virtually any situation. However, we usually pay for this flexibility with our hard-earned rubles. Fire rate, death by 1,000 cuts. If you can fire 10 rounds when they can only fire 5, that can be enough of an edge, even with bullets that are slightly lower on effectiveness. And finally, sheer damage, with a little bit of pen on the side. This is a bit of a special category, but in short, getting hit with an AP-20 slug hurts like hell no matter who you are. Naturally, we have to think about the situational elements as well. What are we using the gun for, and what map? This will likely be very different if we're trying to complete a quest like Shooterborn in Heaven, where we're looking for 100-meter headshots, or killing PMCs in the dorms, where we're really getting into the thick of it with our hands dirty. Fairly obviously, a map like Factory has different considerations to a map like Woods. For me, this is mostly about range, and whether we feel like we need full auto on our gun. Let's jump into the first category, which is big old bullets. This feels like the most natural place for me to start, as these guns fire rounds that bring terror to all you face. There is nothing scarier than an opponent holding a gun that blacks any limit touches. The biggest conventional rounds of the game, 7.62-54R, is only fired by a few weapons. The Mosin is now very expensive at usually 50 or 40k, and the SV98 is typically hated due to the small trigger delay. The SVD on the other hand is my first recommended PMC killer. They are usually around 60k on the flea market, and is the only gun for this caliber that is semi-auto. The SVD is an absolute monster, with the debate usually being between taking 7M1 ammo or SNB. With the thorax health changes, 7M1 is one of the few rounds left that can one-tap players and scavs to the chest with 86 damage, but is now so close to the 85 threshold that any armor mitigation will pretty much require a second follow-up shot to kill. I think it's kind of a moot point, but SMB will definitely guarantee that 2 shots is all it takes versus level 6 armor PMCs, whereas 7N1 will one-shot low armor players and scavs in one hit, i.e. if they're wearing less than level 4 armor. As the wipe progresses, SMB might be the best choice here, and it's also cheaper. One massive plus for the SVD is that it's pretty good straight off the shelf, as it's semi-auto and we're not quite as worried about recoil. It can also take a PSO scope directly on its dovetail mount, and these are really cheap. It also takes a 20-round magazine, which is plentiful for this weapon, and given the low fire rate of this type of gun, I normally only take 1 in the weapon and 1 in the rig, with a stack of rounds in the secure container. This greatly limits the amount of ammo loss in the event of death, as we're talking about around 30k kept outside of the secure container. One little trick is that you can buy the CAA DRG mount from Mechanic Level 2 for 3000, which allows you to run a laser for those close-up fights, when things get hairy. Quick 5 seconds before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. Let's carry on. Next up in the monster round category we have 7.62-51 NATO weapons. There's a bunch of guns that run this, including the well-loved M1A, but the standout budget weapon here, as always, is the Vepr Hunter. With the ability to take the PSO and other dovetail mounted scopes similarly to the SVD, and typically sitting at around 30 to 35,000 on the flea market, this is the ultimate rat gun. The Hunter can take a 10-round mag, and basically can't be modded at all. The base rounds are the M80s, which are pretty good, but if you want to guarantee those player kills, you should be running one of the higher rounds to take down level 5 and 6 armor. Although it can be pricey on the flea for M61 or M62, given that you can only hold 10 rounds anyway, the loss is limited. As the Hunter is a full value weapon, if you really want to run right up against the limits of what is possible on a budget, you can add 5 M80s to the bottom of the mag first, and then load 5 good rounds on the top and 1 in the chamber. This way, if you die straight away, you'll only lose 11 of those 1000 plus ruble rounds, but you'll still have a good 6 shots if you meet anyone. One more pro tip, both the Hunter and the SVD can take the TTO1 in place of the rear sight, which lets you run a number of reflex and holographics. Moving down through the ammo list, our next stop is assault rifles. This may seem like a bit of a no-brainer, but the ARs deserve a mention because they are naturally so flexible. They generally combine the ability for accuracy over long range, with full auto at close range, and a variety of ammunition that lets them cut through enemy armor and deal a good amount of damage with access to high capacity magazines. The biggest downside is typically the expense of running a well-modded gun, but that is the price that you have to pay if you're looking to cover all bases. Good ammo for these weapons can be very expensive as well, especially given how players typically are a bit more liberal with the trigger finger with access to automatic. I've done a few different guides for ARs which I'll link down in the description if you're interested, and for beginners I recommend the Budget AKMS build, which is super cheap at around 40k. However, the standout for intermediate level players is a budget modded M4 with M855A1 ammunition, which is 100,000 rubles for the base gun. The key here is that a full 60 round magazine costs around 15k from Peacekeeper versus 60,000 for BS, which when we consider the price of our guns and kits is actually not insignificant at all. The effective cost of taking in ammo is actually also higher than that of other gear, because it's impossible to ensure, whereas other kit does come back often enough to actually be a significant positive. Now, I will admit that 545 BS rounds are better than M855A1, and there is a prep or trade where you can get them more cheaply, but 55A1 just hits that sweet spot of performance versus value. Also, the high fire rate of the M4 shouldn't be forgotten about, as 800 RPM versus 650 the AKs, this has a decent impact on time to kill. For every 4 rounds they fire, you can nearly fire 5. ARs are a good all-rounder, and there's a reason that players use them all over Tarkov. Next up, we have weapons that disintegrate enemies through sheer volume of fire. If we combine weapons that have 900 RPM or higher, and also have decent rounds, we only get a couple of guns, which is the VSS AS Val and the MP7 A1 or A2. Now the VSS and Val are very good weapons, as the rounds do high damage and shred enemies, but there are downsides. Typically they cost around 60k on the flea, but 30 round magazines for these guns are 40,000 rubles each. 20 rounds is at 8.5k, but the whole point here is volume of fire, and at 900 RPM you get just over 1 second of burst fire before you're out. So although you hardly need to mod these, I'm not a massive fan as a budget PMC killer due to the overall cost of the weapon and the counterintuitively small mags for how quickly they run out. On the other hand, I love the MP7. At around 40,000 on the fleet, it runs at a slightly higher fire rate of 950 RPM, so we're getting into seriously fast territory here. The beauty of the MP7 versus the other MPs that we think of like the MP5 or the MPX is that it runs its own special armor busting ammo from HK. The AP rounds will sail through all armor, but they are 750 rubles per shot, so maybe not value. For the other rounds, FMJ is pretty decent and subsonic is only slightly worse. One special feature of the subsonic rounds is they provide minus 22% recoil, which is a really decent buff and worth considering. Similarly to the VSS, ditch the 20 rounders, as with 30s at 6.5k and 40s at 13k for mechanic, it is much more feasible to run at least 2 magazines with higher capacity. These guns do make you a beast at close range, and on factory they are amazing, but you do give up a lot of your long range potential for the advantage that you get in CQB, especially if you're running subsonic bullets for the MP7, so use them wisely and don't try to force engagements where you'll be at a significant disadvantage. One weapon I wanted to mention before we move on is the Glock 18C. It has the highest fire rate in the game at 1200 RPM, and with a 50 round drum it's just a hilarious meme cannon. If you haven't run this before, go give it a try, but with 9x19 rounds you basically have to hit a headshot to kill if they're wearing any armor at all. It's not value, but it is very entertaining. Lastly, I wanted to run through one more category that didn't really fit anywhere else, which is specifically shotguns with AP20 slugs. These babies do so much damage it is unreal, at 164 per hit. If you get shot in the arm, there's still 104 points of damage left to splash across the body after it's blacked, which puts your opponent in a pretty bad spot even if you don't kill them straight away. Even with armor mitigation on the thorax, due to the sheer damage, you may well just kill them anyway. There are two main choices here, which is the MP153 and the Saiga 12, as these are proper semi-autos rather than pump action. There's a couple of advantages and disadvantages between the two. Firstly, range. With its longer barrel, the MP153 tends to be more accurate over longer ranges with slugs. Secondly, reloads. As the Saiga comes with mags, this is actually much better than hand reloading into the 153. I've definitely been killed a few times because fights have gone on longer than my 8+1 rounds and I needed to spend 5 seconds reloading. Thirdly, capacity. To compound point number 2, the biggest mag that you can get for the 153 is 8 compared to the Saiga's 20 for the drum. This does require a rig with a 2x2 slot, but this does make the Saiga overall better for close combat fights. Finally, lootability. One big plus to the 153 is that you frequently get them back as they are so long. They're like the ultimate boomerang gun, as usually people find something else with a higher value for their second weapon slot and can't take it in their bag because it's massive. I've been using the 153 recently for some quests, but I also think that Saiga is a good choice. So there you have it. Hopefully you're now well equipped to choose some of the best weapons to snag your PMC kills and stay competitive in Tarkov. Don't forget to sub and hit the bell if you want to see more. You can also follow me on Twitter, and I stream on Twitch Wednesdays, Fridays and Saturday evenings UK time. Until then, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.